Since there are some who think of the synagogue as a holy place, I must say a few words to them. Why do you reverence that place? Must you not despise it? Hold it in abomination, run away from it. They answer that the law and the books of the prophets are kept there. What is this? Will any place where these books are be a holy place? By no means. This is the reason above all others why I hate the synagogue and abhor it. They have the prophets, but not believe them. They read the sacred writings, but reject their witness. And this is a mark of men guilty of the greatest outrage. Tell me this. If you were to see a venerable man, illustrious and renowned, dragged off into a tavern or den of robbers, if you were to see him outraged, beaten, and subjected there to the worst violence, would you have held that tavern or den in high esteem because that great and esteemed man had been inside it while undergoing that violent treatment? I think not. Rather, for this very reason, you would have hated and abhorred the place. Let that be your judgment about the synagogue too, for they brought the books of Moses and the prophets along with them into the synagogue, not to honor them, but to outrage them with dishonor. When they say that Moses and the prophets knew not Christ and said nothing about his coming, what greater outrage could they do to those holy men than to accuse them of failing to recognize their master, than to say that those saintly prophets are partners of their impiety? And so it is that we must hate both them and their synagogue all the more because of their offensive treatment of those holy men. Why do I speak about the books and the synagogues? In time of persecution, the public executioners lay hold of the bodies of the martyrs. They scourge them and tear them to pieces. Does it make the executioners' hands holy because they lay hold of the body of holy men? Heaven forbid. The hands which grasped and held the bodies of the holy ones still stay unholy. Why? Because those executioners did a wicked thing when they laid their hands upon the holy. And will those who handle and outrage the writings of the holy ones be any more venerable for this than those who executed the martyrs? Would that not be the ultimate foolishness? If the maltreated bodies of the martyrs do not sanctify those who maltreated them, but even add to their blood guilt, much less could the Scriptures, if read without belief, ever help those who read without believing. The very act of deliberately choosing to maltreat the Scriptures convicts them of greater godlessness. If they did not have the prophets, they would not deserve such punishment. If they had not read the sacred books, they would not be so unclean and so unholy. But, as it is, they have been stripped of all excuse. They do have the heralds of the truth, but with hostile heart, they set themselves against the prophets and the truth they speak. So it is for this reason that they would be all the more profane and blood guilty. They have the prophets, but they treat them with hostile hearts. The man who fasts should be properly restrained, contrite, humbled, not drunk with anger. But do you strike your fellow slaves? In Isaiah's day, they quarreled and squabbled when they fasted. Now when fast, they go in for excesses and the ultimate licentiousness, dancing with bare feet in the marketplace. The pretext is that they are fasting, but they act like men who are drunk. Hear how the prophet bid them to fast. Sanctify a fast, he said. He did not say, make a parade of your fasting, but call an assembly, gather together the ancients. But these Jews are gathering choruses of effeminates and a great rubbish heap of harlots. They drag into the synagogue the whole theatre, actors and all. For there is no difference between the theatre and the synagogue. I know that some suspect me of rashness because I said there is no difference between the theatre and the synagogue. But I suspect them of rashness if they do not think that this is so. If my declaration that the two are the same rests on my own authority, then charge me with rashness. But if the words I speak are the words of the prophet, then accept his decision. Many, I know, respect the Jews and think that their present way of life is a venerable one. This is why I hasten to uproot and tear out this deadly opinion. I said that the synagogue is no better than a theatre, and I bring forward a prophet as my witness. Surely the Jews are not more deserving of belief than their prophets. You had a harlot's brow. You became shameless before all. Where a harlot has set herself up, that place is a brothel. But the synagogue is not only a brothel and a theatre. It also is a den of robbers and a lodging for wild beasts. Jeremiah said, "Your house has become for me the den of a hyena." He does not simply say of wild beast, but of a filthy wild beast. And again, I have abandoned my house, I have cast off my inheritance. But when God forsakes a people, what hope of salvation is left? When God forsakes a place, that place becomes the dwelling of demons. But at any rate, the Jews say that they too adore God. God forbid that I say that. No Jew adores God. Who say so? The Son of God says so. For he said, "If you were to know my Father, you would also know me. But you neither know me, nor do you know my Father." Could I produce a witness more trustworthy than the Son of God? If, then, the Jews failed to know the Father, if they crucified the Son, if they thrust off the help of the Spirit, who should not make bold to declare plainly that the synagogue is a dwelling of demons? God is not worshipped there, heaven forbid. From now on, it remains a place of idolatry, but still some people pay it honor as a holy place. The cherubim and the ark were still there. The grace of the Spirit still abounded in the temple when Christ said, "You have made it a den of thieves and a house of business." And he said this because of the transgressions and blood guilt of the Jews. Now, after the grace of the Spirit has abandoned them, after all those august solemnities have been taken away, they are still stubborn with God and carry on their irreligious rites. What worthy name can we find to call their synagogues? The temple was already a den of thieves when the Jewish commonwealth and way of life still prevailed. Now you give it a name more worthy than it deserves if you call it a brothel, a stronghold of sin, a lodging place for demons, a fortress of the devil, the destruction of the soul, the precipice and pit of all perdition, or whatever other name you give it. Do you wish to see the temple? Don't run to the synagogue. Be a temple yourself. God destroyed one temple in Jerusalem, but he reared up temples beyond number, temples more august than that old one ever was. Paul said, "You are the temple of the living God." Make that temple beautiful. Drive out every evil thought, so that you may be a precious member of Christ, a temple of the Spirit, and make others be temples such as you are yourselves. When you see the poor, you would not find it easy to pass them by. When ally of you sees some Christian running to the synagogue, do not look the other way. Find some argument you can use as a halter to bring him back to the church. This kind of almsgiving is greater than giving to the poor, and the profit from it is worth more than 10,000 talents. Flee the gatherings and holy places of the Jews. Let no man venerate the synagogue because of the holy books. Let him hate and avoid it because the Jews outrage and maltreat the holy ones, because they refuse to believe their words, because they accuse them of the ultimate impiety. That you may know that the sacred books do not make a place holy, but that the purpose of those who frequent a place does make it profane. I shall tell an old story. Ptolemy Philadelphus had collected books from all over the world. When he learned that the Jews had writings which treated of God and the ideal state, he sent for men from Judea and had them translate those books, which he then had deposited in the temple of Serapis, for he was a pagan. Up to the present day, the translated books remain there in the temple. But will the temple of Serapis be holy because of the holy books? Heaven forbid. Although the books have their own holiness, they do not give a share of it to the place because those who frequent the place are defiled. You must apply the same argument to the synagogue. Even if there is no idol there, still demons do inhabit the place. And I say this not only about the synagogue here in town, but about the one in Daphne as well. For at Daphne you have a more wicked place of perdition, which they call Matronas. I have heard that many of the faithful go up there and sleep beside the place. But heaven forbid that I call these people faithful. For to me the shrine of Matrona and the temple of Apollo are equally profane. If anyone charges me with boldness, I will in turn charge him with the utmost madness. For, tell me, is not the dwelling place of demons a place of impiety, even if no God's statue stands there? Here the slayers of Christ gather together. Here the cross is driven out. Here God is blasphemed. Here the Father is ignored. Here the Son is outraged. Here the grace of the Spirit is rejected. Does not greater harm come from this place, since the Jews themselves are demons? In the pagan temple, the impiety is naked and obvious. It would not be easy to deceive a man of sound and prudent mind, or entice him to go there. But in the synagogue, there are men who say they worship God and abhor idols, men who say they have prophets and pay them honor. But by their words, they make ready an abundance of bait to catch in their nets the simpler souls who are so foolish as to be caught off guard. So the godlessness of the Jews and the pagans is on a par. But the Jews practice a deceit which is more dangerous. In their synagogue stands an invisible altar of deceit on which they sacrifice not sheep and calves, but the souls of men. Finally, if the ceremonies of the Jews move you to admiration, what do you have in common with us? If the Jewish ceremonies are venerable and great, our are lies. But if ours are true, as they are true, theirs are filled with deceit. I am not speaking of the Scriptures. Heaven forbid. It was the Scriptures which took me by the hand and led me to Christ. But I am talking about the ungodliness and present madness of the Jews. Certainly it is the time for me to show that demons dwell in the synagogue, not only in the place itself, but also in the souls of the Jews. As Christ said, when an unclean spirit is gone out, he walks through dry places seeking rest. If he does not find it, he says, I shall return to my house. And coming, he finds it empty, swept, and garnished. Then he goes and takes with him 7 other spirits more wicked than himself, and they enter into him, and the last state of that man is made worse than the first. So shall it be also to this generation's. Do you see that demons dwell in their souls, and that these demons are more dangerous than the ones of old? And this is very reasonable. In the old days, the Jews acted impiously toward the prophets. Now they outrage the master of the prophets. Tell me this, do you not shudder to come into the same place with men possessed, who have so many unclean spirits, who have been reared amid slaughter and bloodshed? Must you share a greeting with them and exchange a bare word? Must you not turn away from them, since they are the common disgrace and infection of the whole world? Have they not come to every form of wickedness? Have not all the prophets spent themselves making many and long speeches of accusation against them? What tragedy, what manner of lawlessness have they not eclipsed by their blood guiltiness? They sacrificed their own sons and daughters to demons. They refused to recognize nature. They forgot the pangs of birth. They trod underfoot the rearing of their children. They overturned from their foundations the laws of kingship. They became more savage than any wild beast. Wild beasts oftentimes lay down their lives and scorn their own safety to protect their young. No necessity forced the Jews, when they slew their own children with their own hands, to pay honor to the avenging demons, the foes of our life. What deed of theirs should strike us with greater astonishment? Their ungodliness, or their cruelty, or their inhumanity? That they sacrificed their children, or that they sacrificed them to demons? Because of their licentiousness, did they not show a lust beyond that of irrational animals? Hear what the prophet says of their excesses. They are become as amorous stallions. Everyone neighed after his neighbor's wife. He did not say, everyone lusted after his neighbor's wife, but he expressed the madness which came from their licentiousness with the greatest clarity by speaking of it as the neighing of brute beasts. What else do you wish me to tell you? Shall I tell you of their plundering, their covetousness, their abandonment of the poor, their thefts, their cheating in trade? The whole day long will not be enough to give you an account of these things. But do their festivals have something solemn and great about them? They have shown that these too are impure. Listen to the prophets. Rather, listen to God, and with how strong a statement he turns his back on them. I have found your festivals hateful. I have thrust them away from myself. Does God hate their festivals, and do you share in them? He did not say this or that festival, but all of them together. Do you wish to see that God hates the worship paid with kettle drums, with lyres, with harps, and other instruments? God said, "Take away from me the sound of your songs, and I will not hear the canticle of you harps." If God said, "Take them away from me," do you run to listen to the trumpets? Are these sacrifices and offerings not an abomination? If you bring me the finest wheaten flour, it is in vain. Incense is an abomination to me. The incense is an abomination. Is not the place also an abomination? Before they committed the crime of crimes, before they killed their master, before the cross, before the slaying of Christ, it was an abomination. Is it not now all the more an abomination? And yet what is more fragrant than incense? But God looks not to the nature of the gifts, but to the intention of those who bring them. It is this intention that he judges their offerings. He paid heed to Abel, and then to his gifts. He looked at Cain, and then turned away from his offering. For Scripture says, "For Cain and his offerings he had no regard." Noah offered to God sacrifices of sheep and calves and birds. The Scriptures say, "And the Lord smelled a sweet odor." That is, he accepted the offerings. For God has no nostrils, but is a bodiless spirit. Yet what is carried up from the altar is the odor and smoke from burning bodies, and nothing is more malodorous than such a savor. But that you may learn that God attends to the intention of the one offering the sacrifice and then accepts or rejects it, Scripture calls the odor and the smoke a sweet savor. But it calls the incense an abomination, because the intention of those offering it reeked with a great stench. Do you wish to learn that, together with the sacrifices and the musical instruments and the festivals and the incense, God also rejects the temple because of those who enter it? He showed this mostly by his deeds, when he gave it over to barbarian hands, and later when he utterly destroyed it. But even before its destruction, through his prophet he shouted aloud and said, "Put not your trust in deceitful words, for it will not help you when you say, 'This is the temple of the Lord.'" The temple of the Lord. What the prophet says is that the temple does not make holy those who gather there, but those who gather there make the temple holy. If the temple did not help at a time when the cherubim and the ark were there, much less will it help now that all those things are gone, now that God's rejection is complete, now that there is greater ground for enmity. How great an act of madness and derangement would it be to take as your partners in the festivals those who have been dishonored, those whom God has forsaken, those who angered the Master? Do you consider that the Jews are wiser than the fathers who came from everywhere in the world? How can you do that when the Jews have been driven from their ancestral commonwealth and way of life and have no sacred festival to celebrate? I hear many say that the Pasch and the Feast of Unleavened Bread are one. But there is no Feast of Unleavened Bread among them, nor is there a Pasch. Why is there no Feast of Unleavened Bread among them? Hear the words of the lawgiver. You may not sacrifice the Passover in any one of the cities which the Lord your God gives you, but only in the place in which his name shall be invoked. And Moses was here speaking of Jerusalem. Do you see how God confined the festival to one city and later destroyed the city so that, even if it was against their wills, he might lead them away from that way of life? Surely it is clear to everybody that God foresaw what would come to pass. Why then did he bring them together to that land from all over the world if he foresaw that their city would be destroyed? Is it not very obvious that he did this because he wished to bring their ritual to an end? God did bring the ritual to an end, but you go along with the Jews, of whom the prophet said, "Who is blind but my children, or deaf but those who lord it over them?" And against whom did they show their want of sense and feeling? Was it not against the apostles, the prophets, and their teachers? Why must I mention teachers and prophets when they slaughtered their own children? For they did sacrifice their sons and daughters to demons. When they ignored the voice of nature, were they going to observe the festival days? Tell me this. Did they not trample kinship underfoot? Did they not forget their children? Did they not forget the very God who created them? Moses said, "You have forsaken the God that begot you, and have forgotten the God that nurtured you." Were they going to keep the festivals after they had forsaken God? Who could say that? Christ did keep the Pasch with them. Yet he did not do so with the idea that we should keep the Pasch with them. He did so that he might bring the reality to what foreshadowed the reality. He also submitted to circumcision, kept the Sabbath, observed the festival days, and ate the unleavened bread. But he did all these things in Jerusalem. However, we are subject to none of these things, and on this Paul spoke out loud and clear. If you be circumcised, Christ shall be of no advantage to you. And again, speaking of the feast of unleavened bread, he said, "Therefore, let us keep festival, not with the old leaven, not with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. For our unleavened bread is not a mixed flour, but an uncorrupted and virtuous way of life." Why did Christ keep the Pasch at that time? The old Pasch was a type of the Pasch to come, and the reality had to supplant the type. So Christ first showed the foreshadowing and then brought the reality to the banquet table. Once the reality has come, the type which foreshadowed it is henceforth lost in its own shadow and no longer fills the need. So do not keep pleading this excuse, but show me that Christ did command us to observe the old Pasch. I am showing you quite the opposite. I am showing you that Christ not only did not command us to keep the festival days, but even freed us from the obligation to do so. Hear what Paul had to say. And when I speak of Paul, I mean Christ, for it is Christ who moved Paul's soul to speak. What then did Paul say? You are observing days and months and seasons and years. I fear for you, lest perhaps I have labored in vain among you. And again, as often as you shall eat this bread and drink this cup, you shall proclaim the death of the Lord. When he said, as often as, Paul gave the right and power to decide this to those who approached the mysteries and freed them from any obligation to observe the festival days. Now, our Pasch and Lent are not one and the same thing. The Pasch is one thing, Lent another. Lent comes once each year. Our Pasch is celebrated 3 times each week, sometimes even 4 times, or rather as often as we wish. For the Pasch is not a fast, but the offering and sacrifice which is celebrated at each religion service. That you may know that this is true, listen to Paul when he says, "For Christ, our Passover, has been sacrificed." And again, "As often as you shall eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the death of the Lord. So as often as you approach the sacrificial banquet with a clean conscience, you celebrate the Passover. You celebrate it not when you fast, but when you share in that sacrifice. For as often as you shall eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the death of the Lord." Our Pasch is the proclamation of the Lord's death. The sacrifice which we offer today, that which was offered yesterday, and each day's sacrifice is alike, and the same as the sacrifice offered on that Sabbath day. The sacrifice offered on that Sabbath is no more solemn than today's, nor is today's of less value than that. They are one and the same, alike filled with awe and salvation. Why then do we fast for 40 days? In the past, and especially at the time when Christ entrusted to us these sacred mysteries, many a man approached the sacrificial banquet without thought or preparation. Since the fathers realized that it was harmful for a person to approach the mysteries in this heedless fashion, they came together and marked out 40 days for people to fast, pray, and gather together to hear the word of God. Their purpose was that we might all scrupulously purify ourselves during Tiff's time by our prayers, almsgiving, fasting, vigils, tears, confessions, and all the other pious practices, so that we might all scrupulously purify ourselves during Tiff's time by our prayers. Almsgiving, fasting, vigils, tears, confessions, and all the other pious practices, so that we might approach the mysteries with our consciences made as clean as we could make them. And they did well when they came to our aid, and established for us the practice of this Lenten fast. This is clear because if we keep shouting and proclaiming a fast the whole year through, no one listens to what we say. But as soon as the season of Lent draws near, even the laziest of men rouses himself, even though no one counsels or advises him. Why? He gets advice and counsel from the season of Lent. So, if a Jew or pagan asks you why you are fasting, do not tell him that it is because of the Pasch or because of the mystery of the cross. If you tell him that, you give him an ample grip upon you. Tell him we fast because of our sins and because we are going to approach the mysteries. The Pasch is not a reason for fasting or grief. It is a reason for cheerfulness and joy. The cross has taken away sin. It was an expiation for the world, a reconciliation for the ancient enmity. It opened the gates of heaven, changed those who hated into friends. It took our human nature, led it up to heaven, and seated it at the right hand of God's throne. And it brought to us 10,000 other blessings.